Welcome to another episode of Simplexity Podcast series. Brené Brown said, vulnerability is the birthplace for love, belonging, joy, and empathy. And also, vulnerability is the birthplace for innovation, creativity, and change. No empathy without vulnerability. And today, we are trying to understand and get deeper into this dark emotion. I'm talking to a good friend of mine, Kate, who supports entrepreneurs across Australia and global ecosystem, a specialist in empowering the founders, leaders, and executives to scale their business. She has identified a vital role that businesses' performance and mindset play in creating sustainable startups and fostering healthier and more resilient founders. As a business and performance and mindset coach, Kate focuses on enhancing well being to prevent burnout and boost productivity. I was talking to Kate on this particular topic, and she was excited to share her thoughts and how it would help all of us in strengthening ourselves in our business. Kate, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. And yeah, you're right. We've known each other for about 5 years now. So I'm really excited that you've started this podcast. And yeah, thanks for the introduction and bringing me on board.
Thanks a lot, Kate. And it is mutual. And I always enjoyed our conversations and discussions for 5 years. I remember that 5 years back when we both came in almost same time. We had a common person whom introduced us, Charlie. I was telling to Charlie about that, and the last time when I spoke to him. Yeah, let us get into this, the dark emotion which people keep speaking about. What does being vulnerable mean? And in your business and in your life, what have you seen, and why is that important for personal growth and relationship and the business?
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks for obviously introducing as well, what I do, and do a couple of things, but the main area where this kind of, ties into is my business, which is human by design. And the reason why I actually named the business Human by Design is I am working with entrepreneurs and leaders, and we all know that you do need to hustle, when you're working in that space, right? That's part of, being an entrepreneur, that's part of being a leader. But I think, sometimes we can really forget that we're actually human within that process. And, obviously vulnerability ties into that. So that's just to give a slight intro to the business and the business name if anyone is interested, and the meaning behind it. But in terms of vulnerability, I mean, we're obviously going to cover a lot of questions how that sort of goes into leadership and entrepreneurship. But a lot of the work that I do with people is also tied into your personal challenges and your business challenges are not separate, and this really does tie into vulnerability. So the question I guess you asked me was, how does it sort of, why is it important for personal growth and relationships? And I think I've been on my own self-development journey for some time now. I think self-development and healing is definitely not linear. And, to me, being vulnerable is really showing up as your most authentic self, even when it's difficult to confront certain parts of who you are. Vulnerability, I think, is really key to personal growth because it allows for deep healing and self-acceptance. And I think without having integrated vulnerability into your life, there is often I guess a case of sort of repression, right? And I think vulnerability comes across in layers, and it depends on what we're talking about, depends, what the context is, it depends if we're talking about deep rooted trauma. There's a whole other different layers. But I think, in relationships, getting more to your question, vulnerability fosters genuine connection and transformation. And I think it helps you to attract the right people into your life. Because after all, you can't find your tribe if you're not really being who you are. You know?
That's pretty sensitive and deep, Kate, and especially when we go through that, we feel that we are in that space, we are in that zone. How could one get out of it and take strength from that and go to the next level?
As in, like, what strategies can people use?
You can, yeah.
Yeah. Is that more what you're asking? Like, what strategies people can foster to be vulnerable?
Yes, being vulnerable is one of the key thing to get growth. That's what we are trying to look at. So how do they go through that journey?
Yeah. So as I said, I think, to being vulnerable, like, there's many different ways, I guess, to get there, right? And I think the journey for vulnerability, as I said before, is not a linear process. But there's many exercises that you can actually do to incorporate vulnerability. I think a big one that I like to use with my clients, and that I've used for myself for many years, is a lot of self-reflection activities. So self-reflection, whether we're talking about meditation, even if it's for 5 minutes, or we're talking about journaling. Journaling is proven, as a tool to really help you self-reflect, and it's really, really good exercise for entrepreneurs and leaders to reflect on where they're at, but also reflect on some of their vulnerabilities and process their emotions. So I'd say self-reflection. I think if you're not used to being vulnerable, being able to share, begin by sharing, minor, sort of smaller vulnerabilities with trusted friends or family. Like, as you build that confidence, gradually the depth of what you share is going to probably increase. So, taking small steps to that. And I think, seeking professional support, like, whether it was someone like myself, who's working not only on the business performance side and looking at, your business challenges, but also looking at your mindset. A lot of what I foster is being able to be vulnerable in my sessions about really anything, and that's from a professional sense and a personal sense. So there's that aspect, and then there's obviously more of the coaching, counseling aspect as well. So they're just three other things. Things like going to, I guess, groups with fostering vulnerability, that kind of stuff. But I'd say those three are quite effective strategies and tools that someone could really use.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. While you're speaking about the strategies, when we step back and understand, what are some of the common misconceptions or the fears people have about being vulnerable?
Look, I think misconceptions are around that vulnerability is weakness, and I think that is changing. I think different generations, and this isn't, judging generations or from where people have been or whatever, but society has changed a lot, right? And some of that's positive, and whatever, we're here to talk about the positive things of how that's changed, I guess. But I think one of the biggest fears that people have about being vulnerable is the fear of being judged. If I'm going to be vulnerable with this person, whether it's in a personal relationship, whether it's intimate or a friendship, or whether it's, in the entrepreneurial side as a founder, as a leader, or maybe someone working in that space, how is it cultivating a safe space for me? and the misconceptions around weakness. I think the perspective is changing. In reality, vulnerability is a huge strength. It takes a lot of courage to show those kind of deeper, more sensitive parts of yourself. And when you do, it not only fosters personal growth, but it also allows others to help on their journey by showing that it's okay to be authentic. So I think it should be seen as a huge strength.
Thank you, Kate. And how do you differentiate between healthy vulnerability and oversharing? Because you said that you can share with fellow family friends and someone who are not judgmental, but then is there an area where we tend to overshare and that becomes challenging?
Look, I think the difference that I sort of foresee it is that healthy vulnerability involves like sharing your experiences, or your emotions, in a way that promotes understanding and connection. And it's done really more with intention to open up a dialogue, right? And support for deeper relationships, where I think with oversharing, it kind of often feels like emotional dumping, right? And sometimes oversharing can tie into an enabling behavior as well. Not always, that's contextual, but where an individual shares so much information or emotion without regarding, I guess, how much capacity that person has to listen, and that oversharing can sometimes overwhelm people. So I think with vulnerability, it's almost creating healthy vulnerability to be able to deepen connection, where oversharing is seen as more of a dumping, and it kind of has a bit of a different connotation with it, and it can often stem from a need for validation or relief, but really not wanting to necessarily allow for deeper connection, right? And again, it depends on the person, so I can't say that's for everyone, but I think that's how I would define the two.
Yeah, that's very important what you said. It's more to do with each and every situation is different, and each person is different, how he deals with it, and what is too much of sharing also depends on the person again and the person who is listening. So it's a balanced act there, and it's easier said than done when we are in that motion and we are in that situation. I think we just get into it and we keep pouring down, rather than, like what you said, it's an emotional dump, rather than trying to be authentic and trying to be clear on what we are trying to explain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's also about emotional maturity and regulation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And is there in any societal norms or cultural expectations influence our well-being to be vulnerable, or are there anything in those lines?
As in, so the willingness to be vulnerable based on society. Again, I think we touched on this a little bit before, but I think societal norms now and cultural expectations around vulnerability, from what I've seen, been on my own journey. I think I've been on this journey, for a long time, but I think the last 5 years have been really pivotal for me, actually, since I've been in Perth, around being able to show up more authentically and doing the work on myself, which really is never ending, but there's different layers of it, I guess. But I think society in general has, in the past 5 to 10 years, is showing more acceptance and understanding about being vulnerable. We're seeing a lot more, and I think that is also because we're living in an age where there's more information, right? And there's greater awareness of the importance of vulnerability, whether that's on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook or wherever we're seeing that. I think that's largely due to the age that we're in, where it's no longer seen as, to some extent, as taboo or a weakness as it has in previous generations. So, there's a positive shift there. There's still room for improvement. One thing that I thought about when I guess you asked me this question too, is, you know, whilst I think that we're living in a world where it's cultivating more around vulnerability and people are talking about it more, which is amazing, I think with that misinformation, or with that information comes some misinformation and then opinion overload on what you should do to be vulnerable, which can sometimes create that confusion. But that's obviously for another podcast. But yeah, overall I think it's positive. But what I'm trying to say is I think it's really important to connect with what works for you for being vulnerable. You know, what works for someone else.
Yep.
You know, it may be very different as to what someone is on their journey. And if they're seeing this information out there, then that's great. We also need to reconnect with ourselves. Again, whether we go back to self-reflection around journaling or mindfulness or speaking to someone that we can confide in to work out where we're at on our journey and what we feel comfortable with, rather than what everyone else in, you know, social media tells us.
Right. When we adapt this into the business culture or a work culture, and how can leaders effectively demonstrate vulnerability in the workplace to foster culture and authenticity and trust? Because we are, as you rightly said, the things have changed how it used to be, and now with the new generation coming into the workforce and the way it used to be in the past, the loyalty is what people keep talking about, or the longevity of the people. There was a set of expectations, and now with the new generation getting into the workplace, how does leaders effectively demonstrate vulnerability, and will it not impact them?
Look, I believe everything starts with self before anything else. And leader, the word leader means exactly leader, right? So in order to be a leader and to incorporate vulnerability, or to effectively demonstrate vulnerability, they first need to be an example of that themselves, right? And to be honest with you, I'm not sure that every leader, that's part of the job description. You know, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're a leader, it's not always easy. You know, you're not always signing up for that. You know, you're signing up for your job description, or if you're an entrepreneur, it's a bit different because you're doing so many different things, right? But I think how someone can really cultivate that as a leader or an entrepreneur is, you know, openly discussing the importance of vulnerability in the workplace. And, you know, this includes sharing their own experiences and challenges to help normalize that vulnerability, and then create a safe environment for employees. Because, you know, I think you made a comment about maybe retention. I don't know if I heard that correctly, but, you know, if people, especially in the entrepreneurial space, like, you know, when people are hiring people in the business and it's more early stage businesses, or, you know, even scaled companies, people stay there a lot for the culture, right? So as Brene Brown, you pointed out, it's interesting because I had a look at that quote before we jumped online myself, because I love her, because what she talks about is a lot of what I try and, you know, embody and discuss in my own sort of coaching and the way that I work with people. But I think leaders should really encourage that open dialogue and actually actively listen to their team members, and fostering that culture where people feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and feelings, right? And, you know, no, you're not necessarily there to be someone's psychologist, right? Because I've heard those comments before, but it's not about that. It's about creating a place of trust that someone can say, like, I'm not feeling great today. Like, can I work from home? Like, or, you know, I need to take the day off because this has just happened to me. Or not even that. Like, it may be, you know, having this discussion, people then feel like there's more, what's the word? Like, people are more connected together. So by creating this platform, you know, leaders can cultivate trust and authenticity and allow their employees to feel secure and open and vulnerable, which in turn can be one thing, one sort of major aspect that can help people stay and then retain staff.
Yeah, that really well put, Kate. That really matters a lot. Even if I look back, the way we are working in corporate world or in the startup world, that being authentic and being open about it and speaking out and trying to let the journey be understood by the people who are around you gives them the feel of togetherness, and they don't feel like they are alone in that world. And even for the leaders who, as they grow up, they always feel that they are alone there in that space. This mutual and beneficial dialogue within the teams and within the people who are around them, and gaining their trust, and being simple and humble about it, adds a lot of value for the businesses. You absolutely nailed it.
Yeah, thank you.
And what are the consequences of avoiding vulnerability? Like, we are talking about being vulnerable, but then what are the consequences which we can foresee in the business or in personal life that could impact?
Yeah, well, look, I think avoiding vulnerability hinders the ability to connect authentically with people, right? So then that leads, into, I guess, by not having authentic relationships, you're really not reaching your highest potential. Because if you're not able to show up authentically and be you because there's shame there, or there's something that you're hiding behind, again, it goes back to what I said at the start about attracting a tribe. So it's more kind of like looking at why you can't be vulnerable. And look, again, it's contextual. Like for people who've gone through a lot of trauma, there's a whole lot, that's a whole other topic. But I think, again, if we can go back to just cultivating like baby steps and, being vulnerable and, probably thinking about when we've been at a networking event and, someone has expressed something vulnerable, and, I've seen that happen before, even when I've done it, and it opens up other people to do that, right? So then that kind of makes you sort of, I guess, open up to a whole other network of people. So I guess, a negative consequence would be that you're missing out on, deeper connections with people, right? Both in personal and both in business. And, I also think unaddressed vulnerabilities in the business world and in the personal world can mean that you can project some of that. So what often happens is the shadow side comes out. If we are unable to be vulnerable and that feeling comes up for us, that feeling when we feel vulnerable, and I felt it myself, and you feel shameful. It could be in the workplace, could be at, in personal life. And what tends to kind of happen is that shadow part of ourselves, which, doesn't want to deal with that and wants to avoid it, can then project it onto other people, which can create a lot of confusion and disconnection from relationships. So, they're the main things I think that come to mind when I think of avoiding it, or the negative side of things. And I guess it also ties into repression, and what that does to yourself.
Yeah. I was looking at a small video sometime back, like, it is like going for a war. Someone said, like, a person puts up a cover and lots of armor to his chest, hands, legs, his head, just for his eyes, nothing is open. And he goes into the war thinking that he will be saved and everyone will be, they will not have that. But then if you look at it, even there people come in the same way, right? Unless until we don't open up and go and speak, nobody will come to us and be the same. It is more of reflective. So yeah, your point is really, really important, that avoiding is leading to disaster,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Now we have looked at three phases of being vulnerable. Vulnerability is what are the advantages of being vulnerable? Why some of us are not accept it, and why do we try to behave in a way which we don't? And what are
Mm.
the strategies required for that? So have spoken these three, how do we track them? Is there a way, mechanism we can track whether we are doing the right things? Or how do, like, if someone says that, look, Kate, I have this problem and I have used this strategy, how do I track it? So how do you suggest people to track it?
Yeah. As in track if they're being vulnerable.
Whether they're doing the right thing,
Mm.
being vulnerable and doing the right exercises, how do they look into it? Like one of
Mm.
the strategy you said is taking the professional help, and they go there and
Mm.
try to keep doing it.
Yep.
But then what I do regularly is journaling, like what you said. I keep
Yep.
journaling whether what all the things I do on a daily basis, so that similarly, when we have to track if everything is going in a right direction, whether we are moving from A to B, that's something which I'm trying to look
Mm.
at.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's an interesting question because I think sometimes with part of being vulnerable is being emotional, right? Is showing your emotions or showing your raw self. And if we're getting into the habit of tracking as such, we're almost becoming too much in the mind and not in the heart. So for me, I would say the exercises that we spoke about around, and there's just some of them like journaling or mindfulness or taking small steps to be vulnerable, how could we track that would be, how we're feeling, right? And
Yeah,
connecting back to ourselves on how that makes us feel. Now, there is the other side of it where sometimes you're going to feel icky because being vulnerable for the first time, or maybe being vulnerable to, another layer, I guess, of vulnerability for oneself
yeah,
is going to
yeah,
make us feel a little bit triggered, if you know what I mean. So I think a lot of it, to be honest, is trial and error with the person, I would
yeah,
say. And I think sometimes what can happen, especially in the leadership space or entrepreneurial space, or even like if people are just naturally more logical. I mean, I'm very logical, but I feel like I have a balance of both the head and the heart. And it's taken, a lot of, practice and, vulnerability to get there. But I think, sometimes we can become too logical about these things and it becomes like a
yeah,
tick list. So
yeah,
I would often say to my clients, let's not do that because then we'll get back into our head.
yeah,
And we want to connect somatically, I guess, with our body,
yeah,
and also understand, how we're feeling in those moments. If we were to track the vulnerability side of things with another person, because there's someone else involved, rather than, journaling or meditating or, you know, those kind of tools. I mean, a way that we could track would be, how that person is showing up for us, and then continue that. So we want to not sort of, I guess, what's the word? We want to be able to reconnect with ourselves to be able to ensure that the person, is able to be vulnerable with us first, and that we're able to articulate and have that conversation and give them some awareness rather than oversharing, right? So we're
yeah,
going back to setting that platform. But a way of tracking it would be, after sharing a vulnerability, is, do we feel more connected to that person?
yeah,
Even if it made us feel icky, and when we've then regulated ourselves, is that conversation bringing us closer to
yeah.
whatever that might be, whether that's in the workplace or whether that's outside of work? So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Yeah, but I was trying to get out that, like, it's not a tick in the box that, okay, today I'm vulnerable, today I'm not vulnerable. I don't want our audiences to just to say that I can use a tick mark to say that you mentioned that in in the
Mm.
first point. So yeah, um, with that, there is the last question or the last point which I wanted to have a conversation with you is, with social media and YouTube and so many things coming in there, people just go and because this is such an sensitive topic, and people just use them as the mode to solve the problems. As
Mm.
as a professional in this space, what you would you recommend for the people around to practice rather than just going to YouTube?
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's actually having a balance. Like even me with social media, like I have a love-hate relationship with it, really, just because, it's about, practicing what I preach. But I think some of that is also looking at who you're following, right? Because there's a lot that we can actually learn from some of these people, like Brene Brown. I mean, she's huge on social media. Or, there's other people that I follow as well that talk a lot about vulnerability and all other sort of mental well-being sort of aspects. So I think it's more, the advice for that is to, again, like each week we're going to feel different, right? Each day we might feel different based on our state, based on how much sleep we've had, based on how we've eaten, based on, things that have happened, in the workplace, or, just different things like that happen to us in our personal and professional life. So I think it's really about tapping back into self and realizing something that works for you. And with all of the information that we have online now, following key people that resonate with you is really important as well. And if you need to unfollow people, of course, it doesn't mean they're a bad person, but we're connected to different people, and it's almost like following the people that resonate with you, that you feel can help you on your journey. So I don't think there's a clear cut answer of it, but I think as I said, like I feel like we're entering a positive phase, in this generation of this timeline, and both which are really essential to components of vulnerability. And I think there's a shift that encourage deeper connections of, mental well-being, and fostering a culture where individuals feel safe to express themselves. I think it's the balance of cultivating what information that we take in, what resonates with us, and understanding that, not all the information that we see out there is going to be right or right for us, But even looking at people's qualifications, like for example, I love Gabor Mate. He's coming to Perth in February. I think he's in his 80s, he's a family clinician, his experience and what he's done, how genuine people are online and how people show up, again, about how authentic that person really is being, or are they masking themselves? All of those components I think are really important to kind of look at when it comes to fostering vulnerability.
Fantastic. That comes to the end of our discussion, Kate. It's real, as we started, it's a very real sensitive topic for all of us, and when we go through it, it's a strength what we gain from it. And the other thing is like asking for help, like when we have problem, ask for the help. There are professionals who are ready to help, and in this case especially, I have seen professionally or personally, there is someone to say that I'm here to take care of your back, just relax, so I'm here for you. So that's the key. And again, thanks a lot for you being there for me and helping me grow, and being vulnerable in this uh, business and the way what we are dealing with, and
Thank you.
help. Thanks a lot for all your support, Kate. And any last comments from you?
No, I think it's been a pleasure coming on the podcast, and it is a topic where I think we could speak about it for ages or whatever. But as you said, I love that. Like, don't be afraid to ask for help. And I think there's a lot of people out there who will help, and it's okay not. I always say it's okay not to feel okay. We always have those moments, in life where we don't feel great, and we don't always have to say that we feel okay when we don't. And yes, it does take a really strong person to be able to do that, depending on the setting and all of it's contextual. But yeah, it's being vulnerable and going on that journey of cultivating vulnerability as a leader, as an entrepreneur, and your personal, well, it will spiral into your personal life as well, and foster deeper connections, not only with your team, but in your intimate relationships, whether that be your partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, children, friends, everything. So yeah.
Thanks a lot. That's an amazing thing which we can take it up and cultivate. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Deepak.